The man just got on the plane. He found his seat was occupied by a bare child. He was about to lose his temper. Unexpectedly, the flight attendant took him directly to the first class. At this time, as the president of Annie is being harassed by an old man. Annoyed, he pulled Carl directly to his side. The old man had no choice but to stop. On the way, Annie was fully engaged in her work. Carl was playing with the lift seat like a child. At this moment, the two would never think the story of a domineering woman in love with a poor boy would happen to them. Just then, the plane suddenly encountered a strong turbulence. The plane began to lurch violently. The panic-stricken Annie subconsciously grabbed Carl's hand. Instead of shaking it off, Carl quietly held it tightly. The cold hand touched Carl's heart. Shyly, Annie withdrew her hand, but the warmth that remained in her palm was already etched in his heart. Seeing that Annie was about to leave, Carl rushed to ask her name.
Ravi d'avoir frôlé la mort en votre compagnie en tout cas.
Au revoir.
Balthazar. Je m'appelle Balthazar.
Alice.
Looking at the back of the goddess leaving, Carl's heart was a little low. She was supposed to be a strong woman who put her work first. I'm sure she didn't see herself as an ordinary person. If it wasn't for the economy class problem, I wouldn't have even had the chance to meet Annie. But the flash drive that fell on the floor, Carl saw a new hope. He unbuckled his seatbelt and chased him out. But Annie had already left in the car. He shouted after her, but a middle-aged man taunted him. He laughed at Carl for wanting to eat a swan's meat. The next day, Annie walks into the office with a confident stride. Her powerful presence makes everyone smile at her. But in private, they sneered at her. They said she was an old woman who didn't know what she was doing. Annie didn't take this to heart. She just wanted to do her job. She wanted to be promoted to editor-in-chief of the magazine soon. But the boss said that the editor-in-chief position had been given to someone else. Annie was puzzled and asked why. She thought she was serious enough about her work. The boss said that although Jonah was not as good as you, but she was a lively and cheerful person. She had a good relationship with all her colleagues, and she has an active mind. It helps the company to develop and innovate. On the other hand, Annie is dead and dull all day long. She didn't have the energy and vitality of Jonah. Annie was so angry that she got up and left. She wanted to relieve her anger by working, only to find that the flash drive was missing. When she was depressed, suddenly, she saw a note on her computer. It said that a man had come to return something to you today, but you were busy at the time. Annie called the number on the note, but Carl was at the bar with his classmates. He excitedly gave the address of the bar. I didn't think Annie would actually come over. It was the first time she had ever been in such a noisy place. She just wanted to get the flash drive and get back to work, but Carl wanted to go home and get it. Annie followed him out of the bar, but the boy's ride was just a broken-down scooter. This was both a surprise and a novelty to Annie. Seeing that she couldn't wear a helmet, Carl rushed forward to help, but this scene was secretly filmed by Annie's colleagues. From their point of view, the two were kissing. This is a breaking news. Annie did not know all this. Followed Carl straight home. Although it was only the second time they had met, she trusted this guy for some reason. After getting the flash drive, Annie immediately left. Carl rushed out after her.
Je me disais peut-être qu'on pourrait prendre un café un soir. Pas forcément un soir d'ailleurs. Je sais pas pourquoi je dis soir, ça peut être le matin, ça peut être l'après-midi, mais je suis assez dispo. Et puis pas forcément café, hein.
Écoutez, je sais que c'est très à la mode en ce moment et c'est vraiment gentil, mais je suis débordée. C'est pas du tout mon genre. Au revoir.
A blunt rejection by his sweetheart. Carl didn't react for half a day, but he could never have imagined Annie would soon be courting him. The woman walks into the office with her usual confidence, but colleagues are whispering on the sidelines. Even their eyes were inexplicable. This confused Annie. A good friend handed her a photo. The picture shocked Annie. She tried to explain it to everyone, but the boss is very happy because of this.
Alice, pourquoi tu te prends la tête? C'est ça que je veux voir chez toi, moi. C'est ça que je cherche. Un peu de folie, un peu de magie. Là, avec le petit, tu me fais rêver. Là, t'as l'esprit rebelle. Et c'est bien, c'est ce que j'aime.
Annie stood there for a long time thinking. Ever since her divorce from her ex-husband, she's only had her daughter and her job on her mind. She had never thought about her emotions. She asked her best friend for advice. Her friend advised her to start a relationship right away. It would not only give her a partner, it would complete her daughter's family. It would also allow her to be appreciated for her work. A quick promotion. Who never drank, poured herself a Coke in the evening. She listened to the beautiful music. She made a crazy decision in her mind. Annie changed her image of a professional woman. She changed changed into a very sexy outfit. She came to Carl's school on her own initiative. She attracted the attention of many boys on the way. Carl never thought Annie would come to the school on her own initiative. He was fascinated by her beauty and style. Carl took her on a tour of the school. Before she left, Annie invited him to a party for the evening. Carl happily agreed. He played like a child at the party, and couldn't resist playing with him. All this was seen by his colleagues. They were surprised by the change in Annie. The two of them were blowing off steam together on the roof. Carl was talking about new design ideas. Annie couldn't help but smile beautifully as she listened. There was also a hint of appreciation in her eyes. When they were leaving, Carl was kind enough to hold an umbrella for Annie. His heart was full of hope for the future. But then a phone call came out of nowhere. My sister said she had a blind date and asked him to meet her right away. He was a famous gynecologist. The future was too good to miss. Annie lied and said her daughter was sick and needed to go home right away. Carl called a cab for her.
Taxi! Taxi, s'il vous plaît!
Non, mais...
C'est une urgence!
Attention!
Watching Carl get so worked up about her, Annie felt a lot of guilt. She met the wonderful doctor her sister had told her about. He was funny and rich. He was the perfect man to marry. But for some reason, Annie couldn't get Carl out of her head. The distractedness of the date was killing it, but Annie didn't care. Her relationship with Carl was getting better and better. She went to fashion shows on his scooter. There were a lot of big names in the fashion world. Annie repeatedly warned him to stay put, and then a model fell down, and no one came up to help. The kind-hearted Carl rushed on stage to help. He stood frozen in the light, not knowing what to do, but also impressed the crowd. The female executive completely let herself go on the dance floor, just because she wants her boss to see her energetic side. But as she gets closer and closer, Carl's rich hormones hit her nose. The flirtation between them grows stronger and stronger. Carl dropped Annie off at her door. He tries to hold her hand, but panicked and avoided it. She was still unsure of everything. The biggest problem was that they were a full 20 years apart. Carl tried to smile and say goodnight, but then he watched Annie leave and regretted it. Maybe it was the wine that gave him courage. He rang the doorbell. He found out Annie's daughter wasn't home. Carl kissed her without a second thought. Annie didn't push him away either. Perhaps she was looking forward to this moment, and that's how they settled down. Early the next morning, Annie told Carl to hurry back, because her sister was coming soon. Carl dressed in a panic, but he couldn't find his other shoe. As he was leaving, Annie suddenly came after him. She offered to give him a kiss. Carl was in a state of ecstasy. The next day, Annie saw a small map posted on a tree trunk at the entrance. She followed the direction of the arrow. Under a chair, she got a Walkman. Carl's magnetic voice came out of the headphones. He asked Annie out on a date. Annie happily got on his special scooter. The two of them walked together through the streets and alleys, with big smiles on their faces. Annie felt the beauty of life again. It made her feel more inspired and creative in her work. Her colleagues applauded her. It was only a matter of time before she was promoted, but in the face of Carl's sincere confession, and had mixed feelings. After a few days of madness, she regained her composure. The biggest problem in front of her was her age.
Quand j'aurai 40 ans, t'auras 21 ans. Quand j'aurai 50 ans, t'auras 31 ans. Je veux dire, qu'est-ce qui va se passer une fois qu'on se sera vu, revu et re-revu?
Carl was dumbfounded by the question. He just let Annie go. It was as if everything in him had been shattered. He spent his days in a state of depression. Whether asleep or awake, all he could think about was Annie. Carl thought they would never meet again in their lives. But then one day, a few months later, Annie's company needed to shoot a magazine cover. The boss looked at countless models but couldn't find the feeling she wanted. Suddenly she remembered the boy at the fashion show that day. She specified that Carl was the one. The boss forced Annie to bring her boyfriend in. She had to go back to Carl to ask for help. Little did she know that he would actually be there on the day of the shoot. He wanted to get back together with Annie, but he found out from someone else the real reason he was invited. It turned out that the woman was just trying to use him. Carl's whole heart felt like it was being torn apart. Looking at Annie, who was smiling, he forcibly kissed her in front of everyone. It was clear that Carl was in pain, but he still wanted to help his lover finish his work. But the photographer's insults made his grievances explode. Carl kicked the set in anger and prepared to leave. Annie rushed after him and begged him not to leave, but she ignores the feelings in the boy's heart at this time. Carl couldn't take it anymore.
Bluffant. Putain. Quoi, j'ai rien vu, je suis pas jury au César, mais ça je pense que ça méritait une petite statuette, ouais. Dans le rôle de la bourgeoise coinceuse qui fait semblant de se sortir son balai du cul et tout ça pour avoir une putain de promotion. Je nomme qui? Je nomme Alice Dantas. Agissez en classe, mesdames et messieurs. On l'accueille bien fort, on l'applaudit.
Realizing that his words had been heard by Annie's boss, Carl panicked for a moment. Up until this moment he was still explaining for Annie, but she lost her job anyway. After losing everything, she was finally able to listen to her heart's innermost desires in silence. Looking at Carl's unfound shoe, listening to the boy's invitation to a date, she knew she had fallen completely in love with him, so she came back to Carl's school, trying to regain the love she had lost. But she's mistaken for a new substitute teacher. Annie is told to get started. When she is at a loss for words, Annie found Carl sitting in this classroom, so she does the craziest thing she's ever done in her life.
J'étais nulle, Balthazar. Toi, mais tout le temps, en fait. Ces nuits-là, je faisais pas semblant.
Et juste un truc. Une fois qu'on sera vu, revu, revu, qu'est-ce qui va se passer, hein?
Annie didn't answer. Instead, she kissed without thinking about it. At that moment, she decided not to bother with age and worldly views, brave into the arms of her lover. Sometimes love is so unlucky. Meet the right person at the wrong time. But as long as the love in her heart does not change, we must boldly pursue our heart's desire. Happiness has to be fought for by yourself. Love has to be guarded with courage.